Surviving the Shadows, a UDR veteran's story. In this episode of Once a Warrior, Life Beyond the Uniform, we speak with a veteran of the Ulster Defence Regiment, Glen Espie, who faced extraordinary challenges, including 2 assassination attempts by the IRA. We will explore his journey through service, survival, and life beyond the uniform. Welcome to this edition of Once a Warrior, Life Beyond the Uniform. My name is David Johnson. I'm the Veterans Commissioner for Northern Ireland. And this podcast is about giving veterans who served the opportunity to share their stories, to explain what it meant for them to be in uniform, and then find out what they have been doing post their service. Absolutely delighted today to be joined by Mr. Glen Espie. Glen, absolute pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
To have you on today. Good to have you. And looking forward to diving into your journey, during your service, and then obviously post-service. But I suppose first of all, where were you born? Where were you brought up?
I was born in, a rural farm in County Tyrone, midway between Cookstown and Coke, a small holding, and I suppose probably still soil under my nails yet, and went from that to Cookstown Primary School and to Cookstown Secondary School.
Yeah,
that was it, and then started an apprenticeship.
Okay, Glen, good to have you here. And where were you born? And give me some stories from your early life.
I was born in a rural community, a rural farm between, probably midway between Cookstown and Coke, and born up, I suppose, a son of a farmer, and probably spent the earlier part of my life on the farm and looking after all the things like cattle and pigs, all the sort of things, and probably been a farmer's son, probably learned to drive long before I should have been driving, all of those, driving a tractor at 6 and 7 years ago, but great fond memories of in rural Tyrone.
Yeah. So we're in the era of looking back into what veterans did decades ago, so don't be telling me any stories about on the roads of Tyrone before you had a licence. We don't want that recorded just in case you get in trouble. But rural community in Northern Ireland and indeed Southern Ireland those days was an interesting time. You know, communities very close together, religion, class, creed. I mean, none of that really mattered in rural communities back in the day.
Probably it didn't, and the community I was brought up, we lived cheek by jowl, unionist and nationalist, and that's just the way it was. We all got on together, probably all small rural farms. If somebody didn't have something, they lent it to somebody else. If you had a bit of machinery, you lent it to your neighbour, and if you didn't have a bit and he had it, you went round and borrowed his. So everybody helped one another out, and there was a great, I suppose at that time, a community spirit. And it didn't really come into, I suppose, what church you went to. In fact, it was totally irrelevant.
Yeah.
It wasn't the trouble started when you started to ask the questions, but what's this all about?
Yeah. So when you were young and growing up, did you aspire to be any job or employment? Did you think, this is when I grow up, I want to be?
No, probably all through my childhood, all I ever wanted to be was a soldier.
Right,
Ever since I was a kid, all I wanted to do was join the army. And after school, I wanted to go to junior leaders, but sadly my parents refused to sign the paperwork because at 15 you obviously need your parents' permission to do that, even though my father was serving as a part-time soldier at that time with the Ulster Defence Regiment. So my mum and dad wanted me to take up an apprenticeship, which I did at that time, a plumbing apprenticeship.
Okay, and what was it that, do you think the seeds of wanting to be in the military, was it things you were reading? Was it the fact your father was serving? What was the motivation?
Probably the motivation, I was always interested in military history. And I was a bit of a bookworm, but the only books I ever read were about military history. Totally interested, probably more in the Second World War. Very interested in Vietnam, because Vietnam was the era when I was growing up. So I had loads of books in Vietnam, reading about that. And as I say, all I ever wanted to aspire to was to be that soldier.
Okay, well, you mentioned there the troubles. When, or what's your earliest memory of realising that there was challenges and that there was violence in Northern Ireland?
Well, I suppose my earliest challenges, remember as a kid, were out with my father when we'd been working out in the country, probably doing work at some of our Catholic neighbours' houses, and we'd be in sitting getting a cup of tea, and we could see the violence that was happening on the TV in Derry, places like that there, and talking about it. But I was only a small child, young, it didn't mean much to me. And I could hear Daddy and these people discussing it, about it, but that was my first introduction to it. But it wasn't then when I found when Daddy was on the UDR, and the troubles really started then in the 70s and 71, that people, because my father then was on the UDR, he was, how do you say, probably shunned by everyone. Maybe not out of because who he was, but there was obviously people within the community, and other people were afraid to be seen to be speaking to him, quite simply because he was in the UDR.
And he was also in the B Specials, I believe,
My father
before that?
was in the B Specials before that, and then came across and joined the Ulster Defence Regiment.
Okay. So what then inspired you to join the Ulster Defence Regiment?
Well, as I said, I always wanted to be a soldier, and basically, come 18, I could join the Ulster Defence Regiment and fulfil my boyhood dream. It was certainly nothing to do with king or country or anything like that. I just wanted to be a soldier. Simple as that. I couldn't have cared less. I just wanted to be a soldier. And the only conflict at that time was happening, sadly, was within our own community. So I could join the UDR, become a soldier, and hopefully serve my community.
And your family, wider family, were they supportive of that decision, or were some sort of concerned that you were going down a path that perhaps was going to be challenging for you and the family?
No, well, I think Mum and Dad always knew when I became 18 I would join the Ulster Defence Regiment, because I'd really completed 3 years of my apprenticeship. I wanted to do another 6 months to complete my apprenticeship, and I could join the UDR and become that soldier. So I think they were very much aware of that. And again, when I became 18, were supportive of that. And as I say, other members of my family were in the regiment, cousins, uncles, things like that. So it wasn't anything new.
Yeah. And what year was that when you joined?
That was I was 18 in January 1975, and I had the paperwork all filled in from before my 18th birthday, and joined a few days after, in January 1975.
There was nothing going to deter you. You were going to join the Ulster Defence Regiment.
Yes.
Very good.
And the first thing all people asked me when I joined, what did I do? Well, basically, I took a week's holidays from my private, or from my job, and went into the school. When I say the school, it was the old Derry Loan School in Cookstown, was now the UDR base. But when you hear people talking about the military, they say they go into the camp, they go into the base, but we always talked about going into the school.
Into the school.
And as I tell people, I probably spent more time in that school than probably I did in the real school.
The other school.
For in many ways, I was probably a pioneer in the real school. Something that in the civil service we do nowadays, job sharing. Yes. I introduced job sharing. I went 3 days a week, and honestly never found out who went the other 2 days.
Very good.
But,
and what was you said you were in a job, you had to take time away for your job. What was that job you got into?
I was a plumber.
Plumber, very good, very good.
And then that week in the school, it was all aspects of military training, most of it weapon handling, the SLR, the 38 pistol and the SMG, fieldcraft, first aid, radio procedure, all the sorts of things that make an infant here. Very little square bashing, but after all, we weren't going to change the guard at Buckingham Palace, so we didn't need that. Not much more really than I did at the BB. And on the Saturday, went out to the 30-metre range just outside Cookstown and fired off all the weapons, the SLR, the 38 pistol and the SMG. And as we came back and I handed my rifle into the armour, they handed me a 38 Webley revolver, a museum piece of a bygone era, stamped 1941. In fact, Winston Churchill cried one of them in the Boer War. Right. And they gave me that and a wee box with 12 round in it, 6 round to put in the cylinder and 6 round to carry in your pocket. And that weapon was quite simply to be carried to and from duty and to be kept at your house for home protection
Yeah.
and not to be carried at any other time.
Yeah.
And sadly, as we all found out, they just weren't murdering UDR soldiers going into or from duty or from their home. So it was a bit stupid having a weapon that you weren't allowed to carry at all times.
Yeah, yeah. That was certainly a weapon from a bygone era, but had reasonable stopping power if you had to use it.
I'm not sure. Well, it probably had reasonable stopping power, but it was bulky, it was ungainly, and it certainly couldn't be concealed.
Yeah.
But someone somewhere decided that we had issues with a weapon to be carried 24/7.
Yeah.
And somebody somewhere came up with the .22 Walther pistol. And anybody that knows anything about calibre will certainly know that .22 was certainly never designed for personal protection.
Definitely
it was designed for indoor target practice and farmers shooting rats or rabbits.
Yeah.
And to be quite truthful, it probably gives soldiers like myself a false sense of security,
of protection,
because we were carrying this particular weapon.
Yeah. Very little stopping power in that for sure. You know.
Very
Did you have a favourite weapon that you would have? Did you have a favourite weapon that you would have used in your time in the Ulster Defence Regiment?
Well, the only way you could get upscaled later to heavy calibre weapon was buy your own and get a firearms certificate for it.
Yeah. Well, I'm just about old enough to remember the SLR.
Yes.
So I joined in 1988. The Royal Irish Rangers, the 4th Battalion in Lissanelli Barracks up in Omagh. And yeah, I can remember the stopping power of an SLR was certainly not to be messed with, and sore shoulders at the end of the first day of range practice. There was definitely a bit of a kick.
No, 7.62 certainly had a kick. The SLR was certainly, and I think we were all, when we brought out the SE80 at the start, we had all ideas that this would be great, but I'm not too sure after a while then we sort of craved back to the SLR. So we did.
Different weapons for different scenarios, I suppose, you know. So any other sort of memories from those early years, either in training or what it was like after aspiring to be a soldier to then be trained and actually out on the ground? What was that like?
Well, where I came from in East Tyrone, I quickly found out that when you're out on the ground, you got to know who the players were. And the players being military jargon for terrorist. You got to know them, but it worked both roads. They also got to know you. And if you were doing the middle as you got promoted and things like that, and you were the guy who was doing the question, and you would have stopped the local players, you would have called them by their first name, and they would sarcastically call you by your surname. And what I found, it was impossible to hide your membership of the UDR being a part-time soldier. And at that time I worked with a housing executive in Cookstown. Our workforce was probably 50% unionist, 50% nationalist, but a great bunch of people. I worked with some wonderful people from both sides of the community, and we got on really well at work. Sadly, one of the people I worked with, I suppose in military jargon, was classed as a player. So keeping your membership of the UDR was secret, was impossible. For the first thing you had to do every morning coming into the yard was get down and check the plumber's van. The only person that drove the plumber's van was myself, obviously. So you had to get down, hands and knees, going around the four-wheel arches and down, looking right onto the driver's seat, that there had been no biggie trap bombs attached to the vehicle, watched by all the rest of your work colleagues. But having said that, a lot of the people I work with, and I mean, a lot of my Roman Catholic colleagues, terrible, good people, and some of the fellas that live in Killeen, or some of maybe have called them Republicanaires, they said, Glen, if you stop me at night and there's anybody in the car with me, don't let on you know me. For once you say, or call me the first name, the people will want to know how I know you, and suddenly it'll get back to the boys. And the boys, as we all mean, is the terrorist. And yes, that did happen with me. Lots of the people I worked with that I stopped and looked about, seeing them on big man, that was it. All good-natured people. I couldn't say a bad word.
Would you say that was one of the challenges of being an Ulster Defence Regiment soldier, in terms of that, having almost to pretend you don't know people, or were there any other challenges that come to mind of what it was like to be suppose you were part-time, which adds to the complication because you had a day job as well?
Well, the complication is I used to think sometimes we were maybe operating in, for lack of a better word, a Republican area. And we've been down there operating with a 12-man patrol, with all the backup that the military had, radios, etc., choppers, etc., etc. And then tomorrow, you were back in that area in the housing executive van, going to some of the houses to work on your own. And that was a challenge.
Yeah.
But it's like everything when you're young. When I look back at it now, I honestly think it was sheer madness. But at that time, I suppose you couldn't see the wood from the trees. You were born up, brought into it, and that's just the way it was.
Yeah. So if we go back to those days, were you married at this stage? Did you have kids?
Yes.
Around? I think in my experience, from particularly talking to veterans, part of the story that very often gets overlooked is the impact that the Troubles had, particularly on members of the security forces, on their families.
Yeah.
And yes, they were getting paid to do a job. It's a job they wanted to do. In your case, you were inspired to go and do it. What impact did it have on your wife and your wider family? Looking back now, do you recognise it was very, very difficult for them?
It certainly was. And just taking it back a step before that, I can remember when I asked the wife to marry me, I said, and I'm not leaving the UDR. That was the second question after I asked her to marry me. And yes, for them it was a challenge. And yes, let's put it, some of the players got to know who they were as well. And sometimes they come in for stick as well, which they didn't need to have. And there were certain times the kids got abused, maybe getting off the school bus. So it affected the whole family. And when I speak to my kids, and probably I was so tunnel vision in what I was doing, I didn't see, in many respects, the impact it really had on my young family.
Yeah.
As I said, my son served 2 tours, a tour in Iraq and 2 tours in Afghanistan. But he says, Dad, most of my hold-ups are still back from I was young and out, and you were in the UDR.
Yeah, see, that's a story that doesn't get told enough.
No, it doesn't get told.
I think there is this, understandably, a focus on those under threat, but it must be very difficult as a father and as a husband looking back and recognising the stress, the pressure, the difficulty, the challenge of life in those days. And
probably, but it just was life at that time. The kids, we lived around a long lane. When we built, after I got married, I built a bungalow on my dad's farm, quite a long lane out to the end of the lane. And any cars had been stopped out at the end of the lane or out at the end of the lane. The kids were straightening the bicycles away out, getting the registration numbers of the vehicles. Everybody was alert. So it was that was the upbringing they had, and we just thought it was normal because these were the things you had to do at that time.
Yeah.
But now when I look back, it certainly wasn't normal.
No, it wasn't normal.
Far from it. But it was what we done at the time, and we didn't see anything else. Just when I look back at it now, I thought I can understand now how they feel and how it affected them.
So you've explained very vividly the challenge, the difficulty of life in those days with a family and the threat. And one of the reasons I admire you so much, Glen, is that I've heard you give details of 2 separate attempts on your life, assassination attempts. And you've been very, I think, courageous and brave, been willing to step forward and tell your story. And particularly the younger generations coming forward. I know you've spoke to school children. Do you mind going through those, maybe the first assassination attempt, how did it come about, and just some of the thoughts through that?
Well, before I even talk about it, I'd like to quote a few words from the war poet, Lawrence Binyon. He wrote these words: "The living owe it to those who no longer can speak to tell their story for them." And I hope by telling my story that I can put across to people but 197 Ulster Defence Regiment soldiers were murdered. Another 64 members who had left the regiment were murdered, and 6 members of the Royal Irish Regiment, that I can put across at least something what them people experienced. Mm-hmm. And yes, the first time was the 22nd of March 1978. That particular morning, I had been working up at Parkview, Pomroy, which is probably a nationalist estate on the Carrickmore side of Pomroy. I put in a storage tank and done a few jobs around the estate, but I wanted to be back in the workshop for my tea at lunchtime, because we're a mixed workforce with the crack. And I always loved plenty of piss taking and taking the piss out of people. And you wanted to be in lunchtime because there was always plenty of banter. As I say, we're a mixed workforce, but we got on really well together. The banter was good and the fun. But as I was putting the lunchbox out to the car, the foreman come and he says, "Glen, there's a burst copper cylinder down at 3 Killigonlin, Lakeview Cottages. Will you deal with it?" Well, first of all, I started to think Lakeview Cottages. That was just beside where the SAS had shot dead a young volunteer about 3 weeks before this. And the SAS operation was about probably a quarter of a mile from the particular house I was going to. And also about 2 weeks before that, one of our soldiers who had been coming home to cope, that fired at his car coming down to Ballinderry Bridge. Thank God that fired an 8-round clip out of a garam between the taillights. And unless you're taught how to fire at night, the guy fired high. And one of the rounds cut I remember seeing his vehicle on at the school. It was a Ford Capri with a black vinyl roof. And you'd think somebody cut the vinyl just above his head with a pair of scissors. So he was very, very lucky. So it made me think that this could be a takeover. But having said that, that's the sort of every time you went to an emergency call out, it was always that your heart was going like a handbell.
In the back of your mind.
Yeah. So obviously more prevalent because of and this was the first SAS operation outside of South Armagh. Before that, the SAS had always operated in South Armagh, and this was the first action by the Special Air Service Regiment outside of South Armagh. I remember calling at home and putting on, that time I was issued with concealed body armour. Concealed body armour, basically you took off your boiler suit, put it on under your t-shirt, your boiler suit, and folded around tight this concealed body armour. And I made Marion said to my wife, she says, "Then what are you putting that on?" I said, "I'm going to some out house here and putting it on just in case." And I can remember she was trying to light the fire, 2 young kids, and all the worries trying to get out and kids squealing. And I suppose the most direct route down to the particular house in question had been down through Coke to Duff's Corner and then up through the Diamond and over to this particular group of houses. I went a roundabout road through King's Mills and came into the particular group of houses via the big hall where the memorial is to all the local terrorists, and up to this particular house by Arbo Chapel. At that time I was carrying this .22 Walther and a holster just down in my belt, and it was attached with a lanyard. And for people that don't know what a lanyard is, it's obviously a bit of string that attaches to the belt and the plate of the pistol, so it falls out and drops out. It's not going to roll down your leg and fall, it's still attached to you. The setup of these particular houses, there was 4 houses in a row, and then 2 on the right-hand side, 2 on the left-hand side. I drove in very, very slowly. I think maybe a car parked or 2 cars parked, but nobody about, place, no movement at all. I backed the van up in front of the living room window, but kept that I could use the wing mirror to watch the door. But it wasn't the door I was concerned about. This was the end house in this particular group of properties. I wasn't expecting somebody to come running around the side to shoot me in the van. So I was sitting with the van in gear, with my foot in the clutch, sitting in first gear and the other foot over the accelerator and watching round the side. If anybody could come round, I could at least try and accelerate off. So obviously nothing happened. Nobody came round the side. I'm watching the door, but I've got to get out and make this walk to the door. And you can imagine you get into what you think's a come-on situation where the house has been taken over by terrorists. Your heart's going like a handbell. The adrenaline's running. I got up and walked. Didn't walk in front of the door, stood to the side of it and knocked the door in case, when I stood in front of the door, someone shot through it. So I could hear the door opening and I stepped across in front of the door. The door opened about that much there and the gentleman spoke to me and I said, I'm here from the housing executive about your burst cylinder. And his words to me were, son, you know where it's at? The top of the stairs. I says, I do indeed. And I thought, thank goodness this is the tenant of the house, just another day for a plumber in the housing's out. This gentleman turned and went into the living room. The make of that particular property, the front door opened and it sort of closed over the door into the living room. There's a hall to the left and you go down to the bottom of the hall and get the stairs up to the upstairs. There's a round window at the bottom of the stairs and then opposite that there was a downstairs bathroom. But I thought, happy days, your man's the tenant. He turned, walked in and closed the door. I pushed the door back over the door into the living room and started to walk up the hallway. But the first thing I noticed, very dark in here for 2 o'clock in the day. And I could see that the blinds were pulled in the round window. There was no light coming in there whatsoever. The downstairs bathroom, the door was open, but there's no light coming in. I was just about to swing my hand forward to reach onto the newel post to swing up around the stairs when this hooded figure stepped out of the bathroom with a pistol and a two-handed grip and basically pushed it into my chest here. And I'm just standing staring at this stocky figure with a loose fitting balaclava, and he's this pistol stuck in my chest. I mean, literally, it's probably a couple of inches from my chest, and I'm taking this all in. And you probably think it's a bit stupid, but I'm thinking, oh, so this is how it happens. As I took in this stocky figure, but in those milliseconds of my taking this in, the guy fired the pistol. The round struck me about 2 inches below the left nipple, and it's like somebody lifting you bodily and firing you down the hall. And basically, I finished up sitting on my backside, with my two legs out in front of me, looking down the hall at my murderer. And yes, your life does go in front of you in the cinemascope in those milliseconds. And it wasn't the size of a house you had, the car you had. All I could think of was Marion, Sharon and Glen, Mummy and Daddy, my brothers and sisters. And I thought, I'm never going to see them again. And the figure walked down the hall. This guy's not panicking, he's taking this all in. In fact, I actually think he's enjoying this. And he's walking down the hall, and I'm looking up at him. I'm looking into his eyes, they're staring down at me through the balaclava mask. And the eyes are completely devoid, what I can see, of absolutely any emotion. As the guy comes over and puts the pistol down to my head, but as he's doing that, I had been pulling my feet in to get them against the skirting board on the right-hand side. And as he brought the weapon down to my head, I pushed myself off the skirting board. I tripped over the chopper bar and out to the bloody door. There was no point in stopping at my van, for I'd been shot down at the van. As I went through the door, there was two houses on my right, and I thought, if I can run up round the top corner here. As I'm running and trying to get the zip down in the boiler suit to get into this 2-2 pistol, the guy fires after me. One shot goes by one ear, and the other shot goes by the other ear, and I thought, maybe I should weave here. But I didn't have to fucking think too long. The next one hit me in the back and spun me round. and basically left me lying flat on the ground with my head protruding back towards where the gunmen were. At this time, there's now 2 gunmen, both wearing masks, and they're running towards me. And they look to be running in slow motion, as if they're coming like that there. And I'm thinking, why are these guys running in slow motion? You know, it can't take this all in.
Yeah.
But it's only afterwards that my brain's thinking so fast that everything in real time is actually dropped into slow motion. But as I've been running and getting the boiler suit down, I got this pistol out, but this arm will not work for I've been shot in the shoulder here. So I hold the slide as best I can in this hand and push it forward to chamber around. And I bring it over my head and fire. As I fired, the 2 guys hit the deck. As they hit the deck, I roll over onto my tummy. And I mean, literally, they're about 2 meters away from me. And the biggest of them, the boy who nicely shot at me, you could see him playing the size of his head, big head. I aim at his head and I pull the trigger. Bugger all happened. The weapon had jammed. I get up and run around the side of the house, and there's a housing executive chain and bullwagger fence there, probably about 5 feet high. So adrenaline does work. I jump right over it. It took me around the back of Forbes' shop. Lots of people at a shop. And so I ran across the back of Forbes' shop, run past all these people. And there's a road that takes you down to Forbes' factory. Arbo Gift Centre's there now, but wasn't there at that particular time. There's a hedge, and I jump over the hedge into this field, and I can see a thorn hedge, and I'm trying to get this thorn hedge about, 50, 60 meters away to this thorn hedge, maybe less. But as I'm running, I'm gasping for air, and going, it's as if I can't get my lungs full. But as I'm running across that field, I'm expecting to be shot down at any moment. Eventually get to the thorn hedge. I jump at that, roll down the far side. I get the mag out of the weapon and find out a round has come up and it's got caught between the breech and the magazine and dented. I get rid of it, get around and the hammer back. And then that's the first time I know I'm bleeding. There's blood dripping from my mouth and down the front of my boiler suit. I get up and look through the hedge back towards Forbes' shop. I can see 2 distinctive groups of people. And there could be 4 in one, 5 in another, 6 in another. I honestly don't know. But 2 distinctive groups of people. But they all had one thing in common. They're pointing where I had run through the hedge. And I mean thinking, Glen, what are you going to do now? You've been shot twice. You're bleeding. But you're still standing, fighting difficulty breathing, but I'm still up and running. And I suppose, for lack of a better word, the Arbo area I was in, you would call it a Republican area. And for someone in the security services, there was probably no friendlies. There's no other way to say it. And nobody's going to phone in to say that the terrorists have attacked a soldier out here. And I thought, the only way I can get out of here is try maybe to go to a house somewhere and commandeer a car at pistol point to drive me out of that area till probably the safe haven of the Unionist village of Coke. I kept a field length between me and the main road. I didn't want to be directly behind the hedge in the main road. And as we all know in the country, fields don't just go in straight lines, they zigzag all over the place. I'm not running, I'm walking, because again, your senses are all alert. You're thinking, what's these guys going to do? They know I went that direction. They're going to put somebody in front to cut me off. Is there going to be someone coming behind? So I'm watching behind me that there's nobody following me, but at the same time, I'm very cautious that I'm not going to walk into a trap where I'm going, so I'm stopping, listening, and your senses are so alert you can nearly hear. I know you can nearly hear the bloody grass growing. But eventually I make my way out onto the Kinrish Road, but runs down from the Diamond. In fact, just where the young volunteer was shot dead, young Duffy. And I could see a bungalow on the other side of the road. So eventually I worked my way down, wait till there's no traffic, run across the road. The first disappointment, no car parked at the house.
Right.
I run round to the back of the house, open the door, back door's open. But you're running adrenaline, everything in this area is a threat to you. So I'm running through every room in the house, checking the room out with a pistol. Mm-hmm. The house is empty. But I can remember in the bedroom, there's a massive big wall map, covered most of the wall of the Arbo area. And if you're ever in a military ops room or a police ops room, you'll see obviously the maps. And I mind thinking, bollocks, after everything I've been through, I've walked into the area's ops room, but obviously it wasn't. But post. Those are the sorts of things that are going through your mind when you're running at high on adrenaline. Came out into the hall, could see a telephone, I thought, ring. Couldn't think of any numbers whatsoever. So I dialed 999. And I thought, Glenn, you've got to convince the operator that this is a genuine call. There's a history of people phoning in information to try and draw the security forces into various areas.
An ambush or something?
To an ambush, yeah. So I've got to convince this person. So Liddy answered the phone, and I told her, and I'm probably shouting down from an agitated state, of course, probably shouting down the phone that I'm Lance Corporal Glen Espie from the UDR in Cookstown. I served with the company there. I told her my army number, which is obviously unique to myself. Mm-hmm. I'm a plumber with the housing executive in Cookstown. My housing executive number which is unique to myself. I've been sent to 3 Lakeview cottages in Killygonlin. It's been a come on. I've been shot twice by 2 gunmen. I'm wounded. I need help. And the gunmen are chasing me. Mm-hmm. Silence. Who'd you say you were? I thought, Glenn, calm down and try and tell this lady who you are. What I didn't know at the time, the lady was obviously doing her job. She was trying to keep me on the phone as long as possible to let them trace the call.
Yes.
But you can imagine this phone is my only contact with the outside world, the world that I know for help. Yeah. And I want somebody to tell me there's a chopper inbound with a section of troops, or the police, or somebody's coming down to my aid. So I go through the whole rigmarole again, try to keep as calm as I can. I should appreciate under the situation, telling her who I am, my army number, my housing executive. Same thing again, quiet. Who'd you say you were again? So I started all for the 3rd time. Through it all again, maybe give her a wee bit more each time, the name of the foreman and something like that. Anything else I could think to throw in to try and convince them. And the same thing again, who are you or where are you at, something like that. Mm-hmm. And I says, look, get effing will help down here. I need effing will help, and slammed the bloody phone down. The angle that the house was at, I could look out through the windows up towards the diamond where the SAS had carried out their operation and shot the young volunteer. I could see a car coming down the road very slowly. But distinctively, I could see arms pointing out of the windows at the other side. I don't know to this day who it is, but I can only assume it was the gun team. Why else would that car be coming slowly? Yeah. They knew I'd went in the direction of this road, and they didn't know where I'm still in this side of the road or the other side of the road. Yeah. And they're pointing each side. Is he still there? Is he still here? And again, I'm only assuming this. I don't know for certain, but I can't think it could be anyone else. The particular house that I was in, the front door of that house was all glass, but plain, clear glass. I remember where I'd made the phone call, standing in the hall. I looked down, there was a pool of blood lying on the floor. And I say a pool of blood, with the palm of your hand, where it dropped out of my mouth and down over the floor. And I thought, if these guys stop here and look in and see this pool of blood, they'll know I'm here.
Oh, you're there, yeah.
And I mind lifting the yellow pages, open them and setting them over the pool of blood. I went into a bedroom and took up a fire position behind the window. I'm watching out through the blinds, waiting on this car coming. And yes, there's no atheist in a foxhole. There's nobody there, only me. And I mind saying, Lord, could you please, if you do something, please make this car go on. Don't let this car stop. Please, Lord, make this car drive on by. And I remember standing there, my heart's going like a handbell, and I'm thinking, I hope this car doesn't stop. And I could see the car coming level with the house, and then I seen the boot lid gone past. And as the boot lid went past, it went that road, I went out the door of the house, out the back door. And again, I'm keeping a full length between me and the remaining road. And as I said before, the hedges don't go straight, they're zigzagging. But I remember coming to this, going over this old rickety wooden gate, fell over it. And I'm walking through a gravel drive across a farmhouse. I actually thought the house was derelict. Roof was intact, lots of foliage up round and ivy. But as I'm walking across the yard, something attracts my attention, and I look round, and I can only assume there'd been a gentleman upstairs, bedridden, and his bed was pushed up tight to the window. He'd obviously heard my feet crinkling on the drive, and the man had pushed himself up on one arm and was looking down through this window at me in the drive, and I'm standing pointing a pistol up at this man. I can see this man to the day. The look of abject shock and horror in that old man's face, just stared, the way he stared down at me, and as if to me his eyes just got bigger and bigger. And then the gentleman fell back out of my field of vision, and I went over another rickety gate at the other side. And then I remembered there's a house on down this road. It was a unionist farmer who lived there. And I remembered way at the start of the Troubles, just where I had been ambushed at Lakeview Cottages, that fired at the Coke police car. And they had went to this particular man's house for help, which they got. But just after that, then the provost went to this man's house and shot up his house more or less for giving succour to the police. And I remember you used to see, when we'd been walking past in foot patrol, you could see the plaster under the living room window of one of the rounds that knocked plaster. And I suddenly remembered about this man's house, and I thought, if I can get there, I'll get help. Eventually, made my way across the road, ran up round the house, no car, house is locked up. Big disappointment. I mind lifting a milk crate and staving in the bathroom window. Rolled into the bathroom, and again, going through all the house, there's no one there. Phone. So rings 99. Yes, same lady.
Right.
I thought, try and get this across. Same thing again. Lance Corporal Glen Espie from the UDR Cookstown. My army number. I'm a plumber with a housing executive. My housing executive number. I've been sent to Killygunland. I say, come on. I've been shot and wounded by 2 gunmen. Look, I'm hit. These people are chasing me. I'm losing blood, and I need help. I need help now. Who'd say you were? And that Gobert, the same thing has happened before, and I don't.
How frustrating was that, Glen, in that scenario?
That was totally frustrating, and I can understand later when I found out what the lady was doing. But I just needed somebody to tell me, hang in there, mate. Help's on its way. We're getting troops down there. We're getting police down there. We're getting somebody. I just needed someone to give me a wee bit of a ledge up to say, hang in there.
Just to let you know they were on their way.
Just to let you know that help was
we need to get on to your second one in a minute. So how did that, you obviously managed to get out of that scenario. Did that just come about? Did a call sign land then? Or did you manage to get out?
No, well, after the third time, and I have to be honest, I told her where she could go. She'd go and F herself. Excuse my French now, but that's what I told her. And I set the bloody phone down. And as I said earlier about adrenaline, it's a fantastic thing when you're running on it.
Yeah.
You can jump over anything.
Yeah. But when it stops.
You see when it stops.
Yeah.
I could only explain it as if somebody stuffed a hoover into you and sucked all the strength out of you.
Energy and strength just goes.
And this is the way I was now. I mean, I was literally, all I wanted to do was lie down and go to sleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember getting into the bedroom, a lovely big sheepskin rug, and I crawled up on that bed and lay back and closed my eyes. I just wanted to go to sleep. I was so washed out. And I'm lying there, still having difficulty breathing, but I just wanted to go to sleep. And I mind thinking, Glenn, don't be such a bloody tube. There's a gun team out there following you, trying to get you. They're going to come in here and murder you or abduct you. And certainly no one's abducted by the terrorists. And I thought, there's no help coming. The only way you're going to get out of here is under your own steam. So let's get going here. I left that house. There's a farmhouse just adjacent to it. Walked over, rolled over a wall into this farmhouse, this farmyard. Walking across to the back door of the farmyard. I looked into an open shed. And there's a mini car parked in the open shed. I ran down, looked in, and this is when the keys used to be in the steering column of the Mini, and there was the keys, Mama from heaven. I jumped in, reversed the car around, and went to go out of the farmyard. Gate was closed. And I mind distinctively getting out and opening the gate and thinking, Glenn, everything you have been through, some farmer's going to come out here with a 12 gauge and give you both bloody birds for stealing his damn car.
Yeah.
And I did get down, as I got out onto the main road, and at that time, Enterprise Ulster were working down the Dramini Road. And this is long before traffic management, as you and I know it. This man stood up in the middle of the road and put his hand up, but I wasn't stopping for anyone. There's about 10 or 12 Enterprise Ulster men. There's barrows and shovels going every road, and I went through them in a cloud of dust, and I mean, my dad was talking to someone a few days later. But eventually made myself way to the village of Coke. As I come down into Coke, lying over the steering wheel of the car, the man who had been shot at in the vehicle at Ballinderry, the UDR Soldier, a few weeks, I knew where his mummy lived in the top of Coke. And I stopped at the first house just coming into Coke on the left. Coke's on the hill. I rolled out of the car. Obviously this arm didn't work, so I never put on the handbrake. The car ran off and crashed into a gate where my granny used to live. Car was coming up the street. Car stopped, and I'm shouting at this lady in the car, help, 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 please help, please help. And I could see the lady in the car, a bit like that gentleman in the house staring out. And I'm shouting, please, please help. But obviously I'm pointing at her and I have a gun in my hand as I'm pointing at the lady. The next thing I see the bonnet going up, the lady drives round me and away on down to the Ardbow where I had left. A young lad came out and I shouted to him, young Ronnie, said, Ronnie, get help, get help. The lad was transfixed and just stood where he is. That lad joined the UDR years later and done 22 years. Yeah. But the people in the house had heard obviously the noise, and Mrs. Stewart and Mrs. Clinton had come out and got me oxta cogged into Mrs. Stewart's house and set me on the salonge and set the young lad as hard as he could lick down to the dispensary, or as you and I now know it, the health centre for the local doctor. And I can see Dr. Flackgate standing in the door as he walked in with his lovely spin-striped grey suit and his doctor's bag in one hand. But it wasn't the sight of Dr. Flack, it was the noise I could hear in the background, and the noise of two British Saracen armoured personnel carriers going by the house and heading down into the Ardbow with the Queen's Own Highlanders had been crashed out from the RUC station in Cookstown. And that's the first time in the last hour from that happened that I knew I was relatively safe.
That's an incredible, incredible story, Glen. And again, it's so important that that experience that you went through, you know, is particularly told to the next generation. You know, you're just an ordinary guy, you've got a daytime job, you decide to join up Ulster Defence Regiment, and then here you are, literally fighting for your life. You're shot, you're wounded, trying to escape, you know, gunmen coming after you. You know, an incredible story of bravery, but also of just survival in that sense. I know you had a second attempt on your life. Maybe we'll save that for a future podcast. What was it like then transitioning whenever you left the Ulster Defence Regiment? What was that like moving sort of back into post-military life beyond the uniform?
It was very difficult. Very difficult. Because, how do I say it? My life was totally dedicated to the military. And suddenly, everything that I looked forward to, that I aspired to, that I wanted to do, had been taken away. And I found it very, very difficult. I'm sure it took me 4 years to actually get over that, to know that I had now settled. And the whole thing of having to move away with family and adopt a new identity where nobody knew anything about your past and keep everything secret. It was very, very difficult. It was difficult for me, but was even more difficult for my family. And that's the bit that probably, as I get older, the effect that it had on my family, but anyway, we'll probably get into that in the second one. It relates more to that than it does to this one.
Yeah. So in terms then, if you could give a message to the next generation, so I know you've got kids, think of their kids or your grandkids, even your grandkids' kids. What message would you want to leave to them of what did it mean for you to be an Ulster Defence Regiment soldier and serve in what is known as the Troubles?
Well, as I've often said to people, sometimes people give my regiment bad press. And yeah, there's bad apples in all barrels. But the vast majority of soldiers served with distinction and pride. And as I said, even today, when I speak to some of the Republicans, I say, I never wore a mask. I stood out. Everybody knew who I was. I didn't hide my identity. That's what it wasn't about. But I think that we held the line to the politicians got their act together. And I'm not sure that people, when we think of the conflict in Northern Ireland, when we see what happened in the Balkans, the ethnic cleansing, what went on there, and the actions of some of the security services there, I think when you see the actions of the British Army, the actions of our regiment, we serve with a lot of restraint. I don't think that's often brought out. And what I would say to people, please, please, we never want to go back to that. All the conflict did was put young unionists and young nationalists to an early grave, and I haven't seen that it has achieved anything for anyone, to be totally honest.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. And again, from someone who has lived it in the extreme, if you like, it's interesting your observations on that. Do you get frustrated by what is perceived by many veterans as the rewriting of the Troubles, the demonisation of the Ulster Defence Regiment, or an almost blame attached to members of the security forces for the Troubles, even though as you say, you were motivated to go in and try and keep the peace. Does that frustrate you sort of in 2025?
Well, I think it does frustrate us, but when I look back on my time with a lot of the people I worked with from both sides of the community, I had a lot of friends. And even though would I've been a victim of assassination attack, a lot of the people I worked with from both sides of the community were very, very supportive. And when I came home from hospital, one of the first calls I had was a Catholic man from work.
Yeah.
And I can remember when he knocked the door and I'm shouting, "Who's there?" and standing covering with that little 22 pistol. And I opened the door and the man says, "They didn't do it in my name." I said, "Of course they didn't. Come on in and get a drop of tea."
Yeah.
And I told the
You
story.
see, again, that's the story that people don't like
they
being told.
don't
That's
see
the
that.
truth of the troubles. That's the truth.
As we're standing at the door, I can remember as well, the man says, "I want to give you something, Glen. And if you don't take it," he says, "I'll understand." I says, "What is it?" He says, "So he's St. Christopher." He says, "Carry it with you and it'll protect you." Well, I says, "I will indeed." And I did carry it with me for years till it fell to pieces. And then I got shot again.
Yeah, there you are.
But
well,
lots of decent people.
Yeah, no, absolutely, 100%.
People are somewhat think that the troubles was on us and them. There's still lots of very decent people on both sides of the community who tried to help out, and not everybody was against you.
Yeah. So as we come to the conclusion of this podcast, how does Glen Espie want to be remembered for future generations?
Probably as someone who I felt done my bit, and I think I served with distinction, and the good thing, I have no bitterness from it. Quite the opposite. And I try to encourage people to work together for a better community. As I often said to people, when we signed the Anglo-Irish Agreement, I have probably more in common with my nationalist neighbour than I had from someone from the United Kingdom, because we're so close. And Northern Ireland is a fantastic place, and if we could all put our talents into promoting our own the community as we know it, this could be a great place for us all.
I think that's a great note to end this on. I count it an honour and a privilege to have been able to interview you today. I think it's so important to hear stories like yours. You've certainly paid the price, if you will, in terms of putting on the uniform and what you have endured, and indeed your family, as we discussed earlier. On behalf of the Veterans Commissioner's Office, I want to thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And it's been an absolute pleasure to interview you today.
Thank you, David. Cheers.